Hey, Family Adventure, this is Sam. Today we're continuing our With Joy teaching series through the book of Philippians. And today we're in Philippians 2, verses 12 through 18, talking about choosing joy over complaining. And if you haven't been with us, let me catch you up real quick on the book of Philippians, quick overview. It's written by the Apostle Paul, and he's writing to his good friends who live in Philippi. And Paul himself is actually in prison. He's enduring a lot of suffering and difficulty, and yet this letter is filled with joy. Paul talked about his own joy, the joy he's experiencing, and also a call for the listeners to experience and live out lives of joy. And so today, we're talking about joy, choosing joy over complaining. Start in verse 12. He says, therefore, my dear friends. And now when he says therefore, he's pointing us back to what he just talked about. And what we talked about last week was the idea of serving, of putting others first. And Paul left us off with the perfect example of serving, and that's Jesus. That Jesus lived the perfect life and showed us what it is to serve and put others first. And because of that attitude, therefore, my dear friends, he says, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Continue to grow in your faith. Continue to grow in your love for Jesus. And he says, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. That really God is the one giving you the power and the desire, that God is calling us to serve others and love others and put others first and live out these godly lives. But God himself is the one who gives us the power and even the desire to do that. Verse 14, he says, do everything without grumbling and arguing. Again, pointing back to serving and putting others first, living a life of love and service. Do everything. As you do this, do it without grumbling, do it without arguing. Now, grumbling is really this idea of it's secretive, it's internal, it's maybe under my breath complaining. Arguing is maybe I'm bringing other people into my complaining. It's more verbal, it's outward expressed. And so he says, do it without grumbling, without arguing. I remember a few years ago, someone they invited me to help them move. And so I showed up ready to help them and serve them, thinking this will take me, a few hours. When I arrived, they hadn't even started packing. Things aren't even in boxes. It's like they're planning on living there for the next 6 years. And immediately I'm like, ugh, this isn't going to take 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. It's going to take all day. And as I was helping them, as I was serving them, I had this attitude of just bitterness and frustration. I had this grumbling, like it was this internal complaining that was in my heart and in my mind all day as I was taking boxes and packing things. So frustrating. And I remember we were done at the end of the day, and I moved from grumbling to this idea of arguing, where I started talking to the people that helped me all day. And I was like, oh, I can't believe they didn't have their stuff even in boxes. Like, that was so frustrating. That was right. And so I moved from grumbling to arguing. And my day of service actually wasn't a day of service at all. I didn't serve anyone. It was all about me. I moved boxes, but my heart wasn't in it. And my words and my thoughts weren't in it. And so he says, do everything. When you serve, when you love, when you put others first, do it without grumbling and arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. And then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. He says, as you live out lives like this, as you serve others without grumbling, without arguing, you will shine like stars. People will notice you. They will recognize you. They will see something different in you. In fact, what they're going to see, they're going to see the love and the service and the kind of, they're going to see the character of Christ in you. That when we serve and put others first, they actually see Jesus in us. And it's kind of like what Peter says in 1 Peter 2, where he says, live such good lives among those who don't know Jesus, that even though they accuse you of doing wrong, they'll see your good deeds and follow God on the day he visits. And I think for me, that's this idea for us, this idea of when we put others first, when we serve us, they actually see Jesus in us, and we're actually pointing to them. We are being stars to the earth. We're really being the light of the world. This is what God calls us to be, right? Jesus called us to be the light of the world, that we are sharing the love of Jesus when we live lives like this, when we serve others without arguing, without complaining, when we love others without arguing, without complaining. And then he goes on to say, and then if you do this, then I'll be able to boast on the day of Christ that I didn't labor or run in vain. That my love for you, it wasn't in vain. That you guys are actually, you're doing it. You're living it out. You're being like Jesus. He says, but even in verse 17, even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I'm glad and I rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Paul's saying, remember, he's in prison. He doesn't know what's next. He doesn't know if he's going to die. He doesn't know if he's going to be released. He says, even if I die in prison, and it's my die in serving you and loving you, that's great. I have joy. I have joy in it because I am serving, I am loving without grumbling, without arguing, without complaining, and therefore I'm okay. I can have joy in the midst of that. And that is a powerful thing, right? He's calling us to live a life of joy, even in the midst of hard and difficult circumstances. So what I'd love for us to do is to be able to have some discussion about this, whether that's in a small group or it's here at church, it's with your spouse, it's with some friends. Talk about these questions and as it relates to what we talked about today. So the first thing is, today we learned that God gives us the power and the desire to follow him. How have you experienced that in your life? What does that look like for you? The second question is, what do you think is so attractive about someone who serves and who loves without grumbling and arguing? What's so attractive about that? Third question, how do you think you might impact your family, your neighborhood, your workplace, if you adopted this attitude of serving without grumbling, without arguing, without complaining? How do you think you might impact the world around you? And the last question is this, how do we get to the point where Paul is at the very end, where he says, for you, I die for your sake. And if I have to die for your sake, I'm glad. I'll rejoice. I'm okay with that. How do we get to that point? Or maybe even a smaller thing is, how could you take a step toward that, having that kind of attitude? So I hope you have some great discussion, great conversation, and look forward to seeing you all soon.